All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jamie Fisher. I'm the BCBA here at Far Northern Regional Center. And today we're going to be talking about behavior intervention plans. Before we get started, I just want to make sure, can everyone hear me okay? Awesome. Thank you, Maureen. Okay. Before we get started, I want to go over a couple of housekeeping items. Throughout this presentation, I hope that you will all stop me and ask questions when they come up pertaining to your own experiences with behavior intervention plans. However, when asking questions, please do not use any identifying client-specific information. Additionally, please use the raise hand feature rather than interjecting if you do have a question that you'd like to ask. If you need an example and one's not given, I will do my best to provide one in the moment, and feel free to use the chat box to ask questions or make comments throughout the presentation if you feel like you do not want to unmute. Finally, if you do not want to have your camera on, that's okay. Feel free to keep it off. That is my preference as well, so it is no biggie. All right, so we're going to talk about what is a BIP. So a BIP, or a behavior intervention plan, is a formal document that guides treatment and helps to ensure that everyone interacting with the learner is responding consistently to behaviors, whether they're good or bad. It's like the blueprint for how the behavior change will occur. It includes interventions that have been selected based on the hypothesized function of the behavior, and each behavior intervention plan is specific to that individual learner. A behavior intervention plan is a live document that should be regularly reevaluated based on its effectiveness, and alterations are to be made as appropriate to best suit the individual's needs. So how does a BIP improve behavior? Well, first of all, it doesn't matter how well the behavior intervention plan is written. If it's not being properly implemented, it will not be successful. In fact, a well-written behavior intervention plan often changes the behavior of the staff and adults working with the clients and creates environmental modifications that set the learner up to be more successful. For example, this could be a staff member no longer engaging with certain types of behavior, or environmental modifications like moving the learner's chair in the classroom to somewhere else. A behavior intervention plan is meant to help the learner to understand how to respond to environmental triggers that lead to positive behavior changes by providing alternatives to the target behavior to get their needs met. Plainly stated, the learner develops to replace the maladaptive target behavior and learns how to recognize when to implement these newly developed skills. However, the plan only works if the staff or adults working with the learner are all implementing consistently and following through exactly with how the behavior intervention plan explains to handle the target behaviors. Without consistent follow-through from the staff working with the learner, the behavior intervention plan will be significantly less effective, if it's effective at all. Okay. So when does a learner need a behavior plan? Behavior intervention plans are not for everyone. Learners who are receiving services primarily for skill acquisition, or those who respond well to contingencies, are not typically good candidates for a behavior intervention plan. For example, a learner who is not displaying any maladaptive behaviors, but struggles to receptively understand language and responds well to the contingency of, if you do this, you can earn this. Those clients would not be good candidates for behavior intervention plans. Those who engage in problem behaviors, however, are typically candidates for a behavior intervention plan. Examples of problem behaviors include, but are not limited to, using physical aggression, such as hitting, kicking, biting, scratching, or spitting, engaging in SIB, or self-injurious behaviors such as head banging, biting, scratching, or skin picking, property destruction, and or sexually inappropriate behaviors such as inappropriate comments, touching, or exposing themselves, etc. The learner who displays any of the aforementioned behaviors would be a good candidate for a behavior intervention plan because they are demonstrating a need for replacement behaviors to help them be more successful in their learning environment. There we go. All right, now we're going to talk about preparing to write a BIP. Before you begin writing the BIP, there are factors that need to be taken into consideration, such as how you will collect data to inform your behavior intervention plan. Some of these data collection methods include direct observations, include direct observations, interviews with previous providers, caregivers, and conservators, and documentation review. The types of documents to be reviewed are not limited to, but include any comorbid diagnoses, family history, environmental variables, and any additional relevant information such as reinforcers, interests, strengths, and cultural considerations. These pieces of information can help the clinician to get a more well-rounded picture of who the learner is, so that their specific behavior intervention plan can be tailored to their needs and their specific behaviors. Additionally, you will need to identify the targeted behavior for change and write an operational definition that is observable and measurable, meaning that it can be clearly identified by sight and measured by collected data. So the ABCs of behavior. Are any of you already familiar with the ABCs of behavior? No, not yet. Awesome. So it looks like some of you are and some of you aren't. Okay, great. So the ABCs of behavior, when preparing to write a behavior intervention plan, we need to understand the function of the behavior. But in order to do that, we need to be able to correctly identify the ABCs of behavior. A is the antecedent, or whatever happened immediately before the target behavior occurred. B is the behavior, it's whatever the learner does. And C is the consequence, or whatever happened immediately after the behavior occurred. So it's important to understand that consequence doesn't equal bad or equal punishment. It strictly means whatever happened immediately following the behavior, whether it was good, bad, or indifferent. Knowing the ABCs of behavior will help us later on in the process when it's time to determine the function of the behavior. Excuse me. All right, functions of behavior. All behaviors occur for a reason and are the result of one of four functions of behavior. An easy way to remember the four functions is the acronym SEAT. S is for sensory stimulation, E is for escape, A is for attention, and T is for tangibles. Once we know the function of the behavior, we can tailor our response to meet the needs of the learner in a developmentally appropriate manner. Sensory stimulation can be a variety of things, from repetitive motor movements to a headache to needing a drink of water. Think of sensory stimulations as being related to the five senses. Escape can seem self-explanatory, but there is often more than meets the surface. One can escape a task or demand, an environment, or even a person. Attention-seeking behaviors are actually self-explanatory. However, some people get caught up thinking that this is exclusive to positive attention, and that is not the case by any means. Plenty of people seek attention by behaving in less than desirable ways. And finally is tangibles, otherwise known as access, which is gaining access to items, activities, people, or information. All right, determining which function controls behavior. So determining the function of any given behavior is a critical component of writing a behavior intervention plan. If we do not understand what the function of the behavior is, it is very likely that our interventions will be ineffective because we are targeting the wrong skills for replacement. Knowing the function of the behavior informs the behaviorist of what strategies to use to mitigate any behavioral issues. For example, when a person is trying to gain access to an item or activity by crying, we would want to teach them to ask appropriately by using their words or pointing. If the learner is trying to gain access to an item or activity, we would not use the same strategies that we would use if the learner were trying to get the attention of another person. Because they stem from two different functions, they need to have their own tailored responses based on their individual functions. In order to determine the function of the behavior, however, an FA or FBA would need to be completed. This is the only way to determine if the hypothesized function is actually the function influencing the behavior. All right, now we're going to talk about FAs and FBAs. Has anybody ever heard of an FA or an FBA? Yes. No, you haven't. All right, so some have, some haven't. Maybe. I love that answer. All right, so let's get into it. FAs and FBAs are both strategies that assist the assessor in determining the function of the behavior, but there are several key differences. While the FA, or functional analysis, is technically considered the gold standard, there have been questions in recent years if the type of control this analysis requires is ethical. The reason for this is that in order to perform a functional analysis, the assessor must conduct a direct observation by manipulating the environmental conditions to elicit the behavior in order to effectively measure it. This can be dangerous and harmful to the learner depending on the behaviors that they display. However, this is the most reliable way to determine the function of the behavior, but the assessor should take these ethical considerations into account. With an FBA, or functional behavior assessment, the conditions are similar to those of an FA, but not quite as invasive. While both FAs and FBAs require direct observation, an FBA also includes third-party reporting in the form of interviews and questionnaires and surveys. FBAs also have ethical implications due to the learner being subjected to more aversive situations that provoke the behavior. So, this is Dr. Greg Hanley. He is a pioneer in the field of applied behavior analysis. He is a BCBA that has worked hard to develop a more ethical alternative to functional analyses and functional behavior assessments. In 2018, Dr. Hanley worked to identify a third option, which he named PFA, or Practical Functional Assessment. This process combines pieces of the FA and FBA processes to create an effective and ethical mode of determining the function of a behavior. This method heavily relies on third-party interview process to gather imperative information from a person or people who know the learner best. These interviews include, but are not limited to, questionnaires, rating scales, and open-ended interviews. Due to the fact that this method heavily relies on third-party reporting and self-reporting, there are not ethical concerns regarding manipulating the environment to elicit the target behavior. However, this method also may not be as reliable as the FA or FBA because it doesn't require the direct observation. All right, types of data collection. When it comes to data collection, it is important to note that there are two types of data collection, direct and indirect. Direct means that the researcher is the observer and they are recording everything that they are watching, including the antecedent, the behavior, and the consequence. ABC data is used when completing an FA or FBA and helps to inform the function of the behavior, right? So we use the information that we collect from our ABC data with our FA or FBA, and then that informs us as to which function of behavior is maintaining the target behavior. Indirect means that the researcher must rely on the reported observations of the learner and other third parties. Listed here are a variety of data collection methods and whether they are direct or indirect forms of reporting. These include interviews, archival data, written surveys, questionnaires, and others. All right, behavior plan framework. So the framework of a bit. The first thing you want to do when determining the framework for your behavior intervention plan is figure out how many behaviors you are going to be targeting and what their respective functions are. Next, you will want to take baseline data on the targeted behavior or behaviors. Baseline data will help you understand how frequently a particular behavior is occurring and at what severity they occur prior to interventions being implemented. When you understand the antecedents of the behavior, you can tailor your behavior intervention plan to specifically fit the needs of the client. Knowing the antecedent will help to identify proactive strategies or things you can do before the behavior to help reduce the likelihood of the behavior occurring. When you have behaviors that are not part of the same response class or do not serve the same function, there will be different procedures in place for each behavior, which means a different plan. If multiple behaviors are a part of the same response class or multiple behaviors serve the same function, then the same procedure can be used for those behaviors. Does anybody have any questions so far? Okay. Sounds good. We'll keep it moving. All right, formatting a bit. There are several pieces of pertinent information needed for a behavior intervention plan. First off is basic information such as name, date, and age. Next, you will need to include the function of the behavior. Once you know the function of the behavior, you will write a goal for the learner to work towards with respect to behavior modification. For example, if a learner displays screaming or hitting behaviors to gain access to an item, activity, or information, we could write a goal that states that the learner will use vocal commands or requests to gain access to these things in lieu of the screaming or hitting behaviors. Next will be the setting event, which is something that influences the relationship between a situation and the likelihood that a target behavior will occur. Some examples of setting events would be like a change in your routine or physical discomfort. Finally, the antecedent behaviors and consequences. The antecedent, excuse me, the antecedent should tell us what happens right before the behavior, and antecedent strategies, which should be included. They indicate which strategies to use prior to the behavior being exhibited to help deter the behavior from occurring. The behavior section should include the desired behavior, target behavior, and any acceptable alternative behaviors. The consequences should indicate how staff are to respond to the target behavior and the terminal behavior. Target behavior is the problem behavior that we're trying to reduce, and terminal behavior is the goal behavior, what we want to see the learner doing. So I'm going to use target behavior and terminal behavior a lot in the next few slides. So please try to remember target behavior is problem behavior, terminal behavior is goal behavior. So steps to writing a BIP. So acquire informed consent from the parent or guardian, collect baseline data, collect FBA or FA data or PFA data if you decide to go that route. Analyze the data to identify a hypothesized or tested function of the target behavior. Research appropriate interventions. Assemble the components of the plan. Review the plan with the Human Rights Committee if the plan includes any form of seclusion or restraint, or if otherwise required. You should know the laws and rules for your specific area. It's very informative. Review the plan with the parent or guardian and obtain a signature, and train staff to implement the plan. All right, so creating the BIP. Now we have all of the foundational groundwork about what a BIP is, what information is needed, how we determine the function of behavior. Now we're going to get into the meat and potatoes of how to actually create the BIP. So, target behavior definition. First thing you want to do when you start creating your BIP is determine what the targeted behavior is going to be. The practitioner should then be able to write a clear definition of the behavior that is observable and measurable. Observable meaning that it can be clearly identified when seen, and measurable meaning that it can be quantified by collected data, so numerical data. Once you know which behavior you'd like to target, it would be important to know the following information about said behavior. What does it look like? What is the frequency of the behavior? What is the magnitude of the behavior? Or in what environment does this behavior typically occur? For example, we wouldn't identify the target behavior as a tantrum, but rather we would say something like, Johnny threw himself on the ground 10 times and cried with tears for 6 minutes. It's observable. We knew that he threw himself on the ground and he cried with tears, and it's measurable. He threw himself 10 times and he cried for 6 minutes. All right. Next up is the goal. When it comes to writing a goal for the learner, the first thing that you need to do is determine what the terminal behavior should look like. The terminal behavior, like we previously discussed, is the final behavior goal that we want to see the client implementing. Once you know what the terminal goal is, it is important to identify incremental steps that will be taken along the way as the behavior is being shaped. Shaping behavior is defined as small incremental steps towards the terminal behavior. So maybe they can't appropriately manned for access with their words, but they can say a part of a word, right? Then we slowly start to shape that behavior until they can say the whole word. All right. Once the terminal behavior has been identified, it is time to write the goal. The goal should be descriptive while also including the components of being observable and measurable. Additionally, the goal should focus on what we want the learner to do rather than what we do not want them to do. For example, we would not say Jamie will reduce tantrum behavior because that's not observable or measurable. But rather, we might say, when presented with a known aversive stimuli, Jamie will mand for removal with accuracy in 80% of opportunities across 3 consecutive weeks. This example is observable, measurable, and descriptive. All right, antecedent interventions. Antecedent strategies, also known as preventative strategies, are strategies that are used to help reduce the likelihood of a behavior or prevent the behavior from occurring at all. Antecedent strategies are implemented before the target behavior has been displayed. Knowing the antecedent strategies for your specific behavior intervention plan are extremely beneficial because it will help to inform the practitioner on how to appropriately respond when precursor behaviors occur. Precursor behaviors are behaviors that consistently occur prior to a target behavior. For example, some clients may display precursor behaviors such as growling, clenching their fists, raising their voices, pacing, etc. Some examples of antecedent strategies are listed here. These strategies include modifying the physical environment, visual schedules and supports, giving non-contingent reinforcement or reinforcement that is given just because, providing choices, and redirection. Okay. FERBs. FERB is an acronym that stands for Functionally Equivalent Replacement Behavior. In layman's terms, this means that the terminal behavior should be something that serves the same purpose as the target behavior, but is more appropriate to get the same need met. For example, if a child screams to gain access to their parent or teacher's attention, an appropriate verb would be teaching them how to say, "Excuse me," or tap someone on their shoulder. When it comes to BIPs, a minimum of 1 verb goal should be listed for each target behavior because the point of the verb is to ensure that the learner is still able to get their need met, but in a more appropriate way. It can be really easy to get caught up thinking that the learner should already know how to respond, but oftentimes it is a lack of awareness that there are other options, which is why it is our job as staff to ensure that we are not only teaching learners how to use the designated functionally equivalent replacement behaviors, but it is also our responsibility to make sure that reinforcement is given as described in the behavior intervention plan each time the terminal behavior is displayed. Consequence interventions. Consequence strategies occur immediately following the behavior. If the target behavior is displayed, these strategies inform the practitioner of how to respond to ensure that the target behavior is not being reinforced. At the same time, the consequence strategies also inform the practitioner of how to respond should the terminal behavior be displayed and what reinforcers to use, how often to use them, and to what magnitude they should be used. Ensuring that consequence strategies are followed closely will influence future occurrences of the target and or terminal behavior. A little saying we have in applied behavior analysis is that behavior goes where reinforcement flows. That is to say that the more the learner is reinforced for a particular behavior, the more often we are going to see it displayed. Additional information. We briefly touched on this already, but some additional information that needs to be included in every single behavior intervention plan is the name of the learner, their date of birth, the date of the behavior intervention plan, the school or agency name that's creating the BIP, and any supporting details such as preferred staff, the effect that the presence of loud noises has on the learner, environmental considerations, etc. All right, now we're going to talk about some ethical considerations when it comes to writing behavior intervention plans. Excuse me for just a minute. Okay. All right. First up is confidentiality. A BIP is a HIPAA protected document that should only be shared with the learner, conservators, legal guardians, staff who are implementing the plan, and or those who have a release of information to gain access to the plan. Ensuring that the client's dignity is protected should be of the utmost importance. We have a responsibility to our clients to ensure that this personal behavior document is protected and kept private. Informed consent from individual, guardian, and all other parties involved. Purpose, procedure, risks, benefits, understand rights, and document in writing. So before you have informed consent, you can't do anything. You have to make sure that informed consent is the very first thing you do prior to even starting the BIP process. This means ensuring that all stakeholders are informed and have provided permissions to move forward with the BIP. All stakeholders should understand the purpose, procedure, risks, and benefits to the behavior intervention plan process prior to it being written or implemented. Additionally, it is important that those who are providing consent understand their rights fully. This includes the ability to give and withdraw consent at any time. Lastly, it is imperative that any consent given be formally documented in writing and signed by both parties, the learner and the teacher. All right, cultural sensitivity. It is important to go into any teaching moment remembering cultural sensitivity. Cultural sensitivity is being aware that cultural differences and similarities between people exist without assigning them a value. When preparing for a behavior intervention plan, it is necessary to take the learner's culture into account. We want to ensure that we are using culturally sensitive assessments and use culturally diverse professionals. Culturally sensitive assessments would mean that we take into consideration the ways that the learner's culture may influence their assessment. For example, I come from an Italian family. We're very loud. We speak above normal speaking volume most of the time. And if a learner's culture includes them speaking louder than the normal volume, we would not expect them to verbally respond to questions in a quieter tone than what is their quote unquote normal speaking volume, because that would be a cultural conflict. Nor would we dock them for being louder than normal. Another example might be respecting cultural health practices or specific diets of the learner and their family. Finally, we want to ensure that we as practitioners are flexible and are able to modify interventions before they are placed into action to ensure that our strategies align with the values of the person we are serving. Autonomy. Autonomy means the right or condition of self-government. Individual autonomy is vital to a behavior intervention plan because it encourages open communication, which allows the learner an opportunity to advocate for themselves. It is also important to seek input from learners and their support network when developing a behavior intervention plan, because the information shared could potentially help to inform the behavior intervention plan and how practitioners may move forward with interventions. Including the learner in the BIP process, when possible, can also help to inherently motivate the learner to do better, since they had a hand in developing their plan. Least restrictive intervention. When creating any type of behavioral intervention, it is important that we are considering what the least restrictive alternative is. That means that we should be prioritizing interventions that do not unnecessarily limit an individual's freedom, independence, and opportunities for growth. An example might be moving a child from general education to a special day class. While this move may be in the best interest of the learner, we need to all understand that it is not the least restrictive environment, but in some instances is necessary. It would, however, be more restrictive if we also added a one-to-one aide to be with this learner all day, which may impede on the learner's ability to grow, making it a more restrictive environment. That's not to say that some learners don't need a one-to-one. Just in this specific example, it would be more restrictive because the learner is not needing the one-to-one aid. We would want to do the functional assessment to determine the underlying cause of the problem behaviors and then develop interventions that are meant to specifically target said behaviors. Consider positive behavior supports such as verbal praise and proactive strategies such as priming and prompting before resorting to more restrictive measures. So with the learner before, we would go in with positive behavior supports and ensure that the intervention of being moved to a special day class is effective before going to a more restrictive option like one-to-one support in the classroom. Finally, continue to evaluate your plan for effectiveness and make adjustments as needed to minimize restrictions. All right. Continuous evaluation. We should be continuously evaluating the effectiveness and appropriateness of the behavior intervention plan and make adjustments based on several factors. One of those factors would be the data that you have been collecting. It would be appropriate to review the data, and if the treatment appears to be ineffective, it would be appropriate to try something different and be flexible or tweak what you already have to better fit the circumstance. You may also make adjustments to a behavior intervention plan if there is new research or best practices that demonstrates that what you are doing is either ineffective or more restrictive. Or if the new research offers an intervention that you have yet to explore. Finally, soliciting feedback from individuals, caregivers, and professionals involved in the intervention can be beneficial to determine if there are other avenues that are worth checking out. All right, and that brings me to our resources page. And does anybody have any questions? You can either raise your hand or write in the chat box. All right. Okay, so Nathan, your question is, can anyone help with the BIP, or would the admins/FM be responsible for coming up and implementing them into the facility? So typically, a behaviorist or clinician would be the one to write the behavior intervention plan, but then they would do like cross training with the direct care staff to teach them how to implement. So the clinician can implement when they're around, but as we all know, the DSPs are the ones who spend the most time with our clients. So it is important for our DSPs to understand how a behavior plan is written, what the components are, and how to implement that with their client so that they can be as successful as possible. Okay, Maureen, what's your question?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, great. Hi, everyone. So my question is, when you were going over the framework, one of the bullet points you had was to determine how many behaviors you are targeting.
Correct.
Is there a limit to the amount of behaviors you target, or is it kind of like a open format sort of? Yes, this one. Is there sort of an open format that you do a BIP for every single different behavior? If there's like a multiple behaviors, for example, a client with schizophrenia who, hits, kicks, punches walls, bites staff, like a lot of problematic behaviors, is there a limit?
So no, there's not a limit. You can have a BIP
Okay.
for many different behaviors. I think what's important to note is that if the behaviors are a part of the same response class, that means they share the same function or they're exhibiting the behavior for the same reason. So an example might be like, I scream to get attention, or I hit to get attention, or I, do something like that. I could write one behavior plan for both screaming and hitting because they serve the same function, which is to gain access to attention.
Okay, that makes total sense. Thank you so
Okay,
much.
cool. Yeah, of course. No problem. Were there any other questions? Sorry, this is making you guys dizzy. I'm trying to get back to the end. Let's see.
Jamie, it's Jen. I'm just wondering, what do you think is the best way for the regular direct care staff to report back progress or when things are not working?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think the most valuable way to report back is through your data collection. So whether that's ABC data that you're collecting on a certain behavior, or if that's quantitative data, we want to make sure that we're reporting that data back to the people who are in charge of writing the behavior intervention plan so that they have all the information necessary when it comes time to revise the document or tweak it a little bit depending on whether or not it's working. It can also help to inform on how to modify the behavior intervention plan if we know exactly what's going on while it's currently being implemented. Does that make sense?
It does, thank you. Do most homes use like just some kind of a log, or is there a form that's used for that?
Yeah, so typically whoever creates the behavior intervention plan would also create the supporting documents to collect data. So at some homes, they have both ABC data sheets and specific sheets for data collection for each target behavior. So with the ABC data, it's more of narrative data collection. So you would say like antecedent, mom answered the phone and started talking with a friend. Behavior, child ran to mom, hit her 3 times and started crying with tears. Consequence, mom hung up the phone and picked up the child, right? So it's very much a narrative, but that's going to inform the clinician of, okay, so we see that the antecedent is that the mom is on her phone. As soon as mom gets on the phone, the child starts having problem behavior. And then mom gets off the phone and reinforces the behavior by attending to the child, right? So that tells me that this behavior is a function of attention, right? So we know that the learner is trying to gain attention and they're doing it in this inappropriate way. I hope that answers your question.
It does, thank you.
You're welcome.
And then I have another one. So
course.
in regards to our day program folks who are here today, I am wondering who is responsible for sharing the behavior plan and training staff at the day program?
So that would be the admin. So any admin that have reviewed the document with the writer, which should be a clinician or behaviorist, then that admin can, you know, disseminate that information to the next level of DSPs and other direct care staff. But the initial training should come from a clinician. Subsequent training can come from someone in admin who has been sufficiently trained on the behavior intervention plan. But I would not recommend having DSPs train other DSPs on the behavior intervention plan, just because we want to make sure that all strategies are being followed exactly the same by everyone, so that we increase our chance of success when implementing the behavior intervention plan.
Awesome, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Of course. Thank you guys for attending from Artistic Endeavors. I appreciate that. Yes, of course. Thank you guys all for being here. Does anybody have any final questions before we wrap up? No? All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to reach out. I will put my email in the chat really quick so that if you all have any questions, you can ask. There we go.
Awesome. Thank you, Jamie. That was a fabulous presentation and lots of really great information.
Yeah, of course. I'm happy to do it.
I do want to just let everybody know, in case you didn't know from the emails we've sent out, that we are using Eventbrite again for these classes to make it easier for people to sign up. It is not under the same account on Eventbrite. So if you follow Far Northern Regional Center's Eventbrite, you should get notifications about classes. And please note also that we do have upcoming classes for adult residential facilities, adult day programs, and RCFEs on restricted health condition care plans. So if you are an administrator or facility manager, or you have a nurse consultant who would like to attend, please go onto Eventbrite and register, because space is limited. Those classes will be in person at the FHC offices in Reading and in Chico.
Also, this is Nellie. I did also want to add that next month, supporting client health and wellness, we're going to have 2 guest speakers. So keep an eye on that. We'll send more information when the date comes.